Good morning. We lead off this Tuesday with breaking news, a history-making court decision involving Brexit and another stinging political defeat for Boris Johnson and his Brexit strategy. In a ruling just handed down, the UK Supreme Court says his suspension of Parliament ahead of the next month's deadline is, in fact, illegal.
The court is bound to conclude, therefore, that the decision to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament was unlawful because it had the effect of frustrating or preventing the ability of Parliament to carry out its constitutional functions without reasonable justification.
The ruling from the highest British court. Let us take you right now to Cameron McIntosh, who is outside that building, live for us in London. Let's go through the ruling in detail, Cam.
Well, Heather, right here outside the Supreme Court, a flurry of reaction. A lot of people cheering when that decision came down. The court ruling that proroguing Parliament, Boris Johnson's proroguing of Parliament for 5 weeks, was unlawful, void, and of no effect. There are many Remain campaigners down here this morning that were hoping to hear those words. Right behind me are the pro-leave people, the Brexit people. We just saw the campaigner Gina Miller walk past here. She's a businesswoman that brought the first court challenge to the London court, which was overruled. It was a Scottish decision that in fact ruled that Boris Johnson had acted unlawfully and misled the Queen. That's what the English Supreme Court now is upholding. It's agreeing with that decision, basically saying that Boris Johnson had no right to prorogue Parliament for a total of 5 weeks. It's agreeing that the Prime Minister and his government tried to stymie the activity of Parliament during a critical debate over Brexit. Now, keep in mind, Boris Johnson no longer controls the House of Commons. He's in a minority situation, although he's still in government. So what does this mean next? Well, the court is saying, in its view, Parliament was never prorogued, and that it's time to get it back in session.
So that is so interesting, and we've already been hearing, Cam, because as you suggest, the reaction is immediate here to this from the Speaker, John Bercow, that he must get Parliament convened immediately. So we will look for some sort of schedule there. But what about schedule now for the Brexit plan? The October 31st deadline looms. What does all of this mean for Boris Johnson's plan going forward?
Well, it's another extraordinary turn in an extraordinary story. So there's kind of two tracks to this. There's Parliament, which is basically been put on the sidelines, which is going to come back into the game. Now, keep in mind, it passed a law requiring Boris Johnson to ask for an extension to Brexit. Then there's the actual Brexit negotiation itself with the EU, which is outside of basically the jurisdiction of Parliament. This is negotiating with the other partner. In the last few days, there seems to have been a bit of a softening on the EU side. Before it was saying, well, the deal that Theresa May negotiated with us, that's been rejected by the British court, by the British Parliament 3 times. It basically said, hey, that's our final and our last best offer. That seems to be softening. The two sides are talking, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of progress being made there. It was statements from the EU again, basically saying that Boris Johnson and the British government have not brought any real tangible new positions, nothing on paper that they can really mull through and get their hands on, and the clock is ticking. October 31st is the deadline for a hard Brexit. There's going to be a meeting with the UK and the EU on October 19th. People see that as basically the real deadline to get a deal done. Meanwhile, Parliament was supposed to come back October 14th. Looks like it's going to be coming back a lot sooner than that. We'll see what sort of parliamentary maneuvering the opposition, now led by Jeremy Corbyn, backed up by 21 of Johnson's former MPs, people that had voted against him, that have effectively been removed from the Conservative Party. There have been some overtures, some talk about bringing those people back. We'll see if Boris Johnson gets those people back quickly so he can take control of the Commons again. So really, we're just in a totally new ballgame here when it comes to Brexit, with basically Parliament coming back into the game, to use that analogy. So what happens next really is anyone's guess. Just another extraordinary turn in an extraordinary story, and we still see the reaction coming out here at this hour.
So we'll bring more of that. Cameron, can I just ask you one more question, and that is, one of the things we're hearing from people already are calls for Boris Johnson to resign. Now, before the Supreme Court ruling, he said he would wait and see what the court decision was. But do you anticipate those calls for his resignation will be pretty loud today?
Well, certainly people will be calling. The people around here have all been calling for his resignation for weeks, and many people have. Many people have been supporting him as well. So that really, hate to use the cliche, but it really remains to be seen what's going to happen there, whether Boris Johnson has the ability to maneuver this forward. Even if he were to get a deal with the EU, he still has to get it through the British Parliament, and he may not have the power, the cachet to do that right now. And it has been speculated that resigning may be one of his options, particularly if he's forced to go to the EU to ask for an extension. Now, that said, the EU has indicated it's not all that interested in a Brexit extension too. So it's really unclear how much wiggle room he has right now. You can bet at 10 Downing that they are looking at this very closely. Boris Johnson has also said he's not ruling out trying to prorogue Parliament again, perhaps by providing different reasons. So really hard to say what the Prime Minister's next move here is, but the people down here, the people that were hoping for this decision today, are seeing this as a big victory, not just for the role of Parliament in debate, but for possibly derailing the Brexit process itself.
What an interesting day to be there, Cam, and we'll look forward to talking to you again through the morning as you bring us more reaction there from outside the Supreme Court. Boris Johnson, incidentally, is in New York for the opening to the UN General Assembly, so perhaps he will be reacting from New York, and we'll be watching for his arrival there later this morning, and of course listening into any comments he may have on this landmark ruling, striking down his decision to prorogue as unlawful. Now, one quick bit of reaction. You heard Cameron mention Gina Miller. Gina Miller is an activist, a campaigner, and a businesswoman. What happened in one of the cases, there were 2 appeals before the Supreme Court, and she was behind one of them. The English High Court had ruled that the prorogation was purely political. It wasn't even a matter for the courts to decide, the courts to weigh in on. Gina Miller appealed that. So the win today, or the decision today, is very much a victory for her, and here is her reaction outside the court just moments ago.
Today is not a win for any individual or cause. It's a win for parliamentary sovereignty, the separation of powers, and the independence of our British courts. Crucially, today's ruling confirms that we are a nation governed by the rule of law, laws that everyone, even the Prime Minister, is not above.